What happens when a picture-perfect engagement party, the culmination of a fairy tale romance, becomes the stage for the ultimate betrayal? Tonight, we're not just talking about a cheating fiancé. We're talking about a cold, calculated betrayal involving the one person a bride-to-be should trust most her maid of honor. This is the story of Emma Vance, a woman who had everything, and Liam Sterling, the man who was willing to shatter it all. But they both underestimated one thing: the unbreakable, unyielding power of the Vance family. Stick with us as we unravel a tale of treachery and a revenge so meticulously planned it left everyone, especially the mistress, in absolute ruins. The grand ballroom of the Astoria, the flagship hotel of the Vance Hospitality Group, was a symphony of crystal ivory and gold. Peonies and white roses, Emma's favorites, cascaded from every surface, their delicate scent mingling with the expensive perfume of the city's elite. Tonight, September 20th, 2025, was supposed to be the most magical night of Emma Vance's life. At 28, she was the heiress to a hotel empire, an accomplished architect in her own right, and now the fiancé of the man she believed was her soulmate, Liam Sterling. From her vantage point near the string quartet, Emma watched him work the room. Liam was impossibly handsome, with a Cary Grant charm that could disarm even the most cynical of her father's business rivals. He moved with an easy confidence, his hand resting familiarly on the backs of congressmen and CEOs, his laughter so echoing with a warmth that seemed entirely genuine. He was an investment banker, sharp and ambitious, but to Emma he was simply the man who made her feel seen, who calmed the anxieties that came with her last name. Her father, Richard Vance, a man whose quiet demeanor belied a will of forged steel, stood talking to a senator. He gave Emma a subtle approving nod. Richard hadn't been easy to win over. He saw the world in terms of assets and liabilities, and he'd scrutinized Liam with the same intensity he applied to a billion-dollar acquisition. But Liam had passed every test, charming his way into the heart of the Vance patriarch. "He's perfect, isn't he?" A voice purred beside her. Emma turned and smiled at her best friend and maid of honor, Isabella Rossi. With her fiery red hair and emerald green dress, Isabella was a striking counterpoint to Emma's classic blonde elegance. They had been inseparable since their freshman year at Yale. Isabella was the ambitious, scrappy one from a middle-class family, a scholarship kid who had fought for everything she had. Emma had always admired her tenacity. "He's certainly turning it on tonight." Emma laughed, looping her arm through Isabella's. "I think my father is finally convinced he isn't just after the family fortune." "Oh, please," Isabella scoffed, squeezing her arm. "Anyone can see he adores you. The way he looks at you. It's what every woman dreams of. You two are the ultimate power couple." Isabella's praise was a balm, as it always was. Yet for a fleeting, inexplicable moment, Emma felt a strange chill. She dismissed it as pre-party jitters. The evening flowed on a river of champagne and polite applause. The speeches were heartfelt. Her brother Julian, ever the protector, gave a toast that was equal parts teasing and threatening, warning Liam that the entire Vance clan had his back, and by extension, Emma's. Liam's own speech was a masterpiece of romance, culminating in him looking directly at Emma, his blue eyes shining with what she could only interpret as profound love. To my Emma, he'd said, his voice thick with emotion, "My North Star, my anchor, my everything. The day I met you was the day my life truly began." I can't wait to spend forever with you." The room erupted in applause. Emma felt tears well in her eyes as he walked over and kissed her a deep, possessive kiss that left the crowd sighing. The centerpiece of the evening was a slideshow, a digital tapestry of their love story, compiled by Isabella. It was meant to be the final perfect touch. The lights dimmed, and a hush fell over the ballroom. The first photos appeared on the massive screens. Flanking the stage, Emma and Liam, on their first date, awkward and smiling. A trip to Aspen bundled in ski gear. A summer in the Hamptons, tanned and carefree. Each photo was a perfect memory, a stepping stone to this perfect night. Emma squeezed Liam's hand, her heart swelling with a happiness so pure it was almost painful. Liam squeezed back, but his hand felt clammy. She glanced at him. In the dim light, his perfect smile seemed tight, a thin sheen of sweat glistening on his forehead. "You okay?" she whispered. "Never better," he murmured, not meeting her eyes. The slideshow continued. Photos from their trip to Italy, Paris and Tokyo. Then a photo of them at a charity gala last Christmas. Emma looked radiant in a silver gown. But something was off. The next photo was the same gala, but it was a candid shot. Liam was in the corner of the frame talking to someone. The next slide zoomed in. He was talking to Isabella. His hand was on the small of her back, his thumb caressing the silk of her dress. A nervous titter went through the crowd. It was an odd photo to include. Emma's smile faltered. She looked at Isabella, who was standing near the technician's booth, her face a mask of confusion. Then the screen went black for a second, before a new photo appeared. It wasn't from a public event. It was Liam, his shirt unbuttoned, laughing on a hotel balcony. A woman's hand adorned with a distinctive serpentine ring rested on his chest. Emma's blood ran cold. She knew that ring. She had bought it for Isabella for her last birthday. The next image was clearer. It was Liam and Isabella kissing passionately. The background was unmistakable, the presidential suite of the Mark Arrival Hotel. The date stamp in the corner read 2 weeks ago, the night Liam was supposedly on a business trip to Chicago. A collective gasp sucked the air from the room. The music had stopped. The only sound was the clicking of the projector as it cycled through the next image and the next. Liam and Isabella in a bathrobe. Liam and Isabella drinking champagne in a jacuzzi. Each photo was a dagger twisting deeper into Emma's heart. The final photo was a selfie of the two of them in bed, Isabella smirking at the camera, Liam asleep beside her. Underneath it, in stark white letters, was a caption. "He says you're his anchor, Emma, but I'm his safe harbor. Congratulations on your engagement." The silence that followed was absolute, a crushing weight of public humiliation. Emma let go of Liam's hand as if it were on fire. She turned to face him, her mind a maelstrom of shock and disbelief. The charming, loving man from moments ago was gone. In his place was a stranger, with a face pale with terror. "Emma, I can explain." He stammered, his voice a pathetic squeak, but she wasn't looking at him anymore. Her gaze cut across the room to Isabella, who now stood frozen, her face a canvas of feigned horror that couldn't quite hide the flicker of triumphant cruelty in her eyes. In that instant, Emma understood. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a mistake. This was an execution. And she was the one on the chopping block. The silence in the ballroom stretched for an eternity before it shattered like a crystal glass dropped on marble. It wasn't a shout or a scream that broke it. but the low, dangerous voice of Richard Vance. "Julian, get them out of my hotel, now!" It wasn't a request. It was an imperial command. Julian Vance, who had been standing paralyzed with rage, sprang into motion. He was taller and broader than Liam, a former Ivy League rugby player who had retained every ounce of his athletic prowess. He strode towards Liam, his handsome face contorted into a mask of cold fury. "Let's go, Sterling," Julian snarled, grabbing Liam by the arm of his custom Tom Ford tuxedo. The fabric strained under the force of his grip. "Wait, Emma, please," Liam pleaded, trying to wrench his arm free. "This isn't what it looks like. It was a mistake. A stupid, meaningless mistake." Emma just stared at him, her face completely numb. The vibrant, happy woman from 10 minutes ago had been hollowed out, leaving behind a fragile porcelain shell. She felt a gentle but firm hand on her shoulder. It was her mother, Catherine Vance. Catherine was the picture of composure, her posture perfect, her expression unreadable. But her eyes, when they met Emma's, were filled with a lioness's protective fire. "We're leaving, darling," she said softly, her voice a lifeline in the swirling chaos. She began to guide Emma towards a side exit, shielding her from the hundreds of pairs of eyes that were now fixed on them, a mixture of pity, morbid curiosity, and thinly veiled glee. The city's elite loved nothing more than the spectacular fall of one of their own. As Julian dragged a protesting Liam towards a service corridor, two of the hotel's head security guards men, who had worked for the Vances for decades, moved silently and efficiently towards Isabella. She saw them coming, and her carefully constructed facade of shock finally crumbled into panic. "No. Wait, my purse. I didn't do this." "Someone must have hacked the system," she cried, her voice high and shrill. One of the guards, a stoic man named Marcus, simply said, "Ma'am, you need to come with us." Her pleas were ignored as she was escorted out, her emerald green dress a slash of color against the grim-faced security detail. The last thing Emma saw before her mother guided her through the door was the sight of her best friend being treated like a common trespasser. The ride home in the family's Bentley was silent. Emma stared out the window at the glittering lights of New York City, but she saw nothing. The images from the slideshow were burned onto the inside of her eyelids, playing on a sickening, endless loop. Richard sat in the front passenger seat, his phone buzzing incessantly. He ignored it, his jaw set like granite. Catherine sat beside Emma, holding her daughter's hand, her thumb rubbing soothing circles on her skin. They entered the family's sprawling Fifth Avenue penthouse through a private elevator. The home that had always been a sanctuary of warmth and comfort now felt cold and vast. Emma walked woodenly to the living room, a space with panoramic views of Central Park, and sank into a plush sofa. She felt fragile, as if the slightest touch might cause her to disintegrate. Richard walked to the bar and poured 3 glasses of scotch. He handed one to Catherine and held one out to Emma. She just shook her head. "Drink it," he said, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. "You're in shock." She took the glass, her hand trembling so badly the amber liquid sloshed over the rim. She took a sip, and the fiery burn in her throat was a welcome distraction from the icy void in her chest. Julian arrived 20 minutes later, his tie loosened, his knuckles slightly red. "He's gone," he announced, pouring himself a generous measure of scotch. "Dropped him and his things in a cab. He was crying. Pathetic." He looked at Emma, his anger softening into concern. "And her—" "Security has her," Richard said. She's being questioned about how unauthorized media made its way onto a secure network in our flagship hotel. She's claiming she was framed. Her laptop and phone have been confiscated for a forensic analysis. Was she framed? Catherine asked, though she already knew the answer. Richard gave a short, mirthless laugh. The AV technician was one of ours. He saw Isabella insert a USB drive into the laptop just before the presentation. He thought it was an updated file. The drive is now in our possession. The cold, calculated nature of it all hit Emma with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't a spontaneous act of jealousy. This was a planned attack. Isabella had wanted to destroy her, not just break her heart. She wanted to do it on the biggest stage possible, in front of everyone who mattered in their world. Why? Emma whispered the first word she had spoken since leaving the hotel. Her voice was hoarse, alien to her own ears. I gave her everything. She was my sister. Some people don't want a piece of what you have, Emma. Catherine said, her voice laced with a lifetime of experience dealing with social climbers and sycophants. They want to have it all. And if they can't, they want to burn yours to the ground. Emma finally broke. A sob tore through her, a raw, ragged sound of profound betrayal. The dam of shock gave way, and a flood of grief washed over her. She crumpled into her mother's arms, weeping for the man she thought she loved, for the woman she thought was her friend, and for the future that had been stolen from her in the most brutal way imaginable. The Vances let her cry. They formed a protective circle around her, a silent testament to their unbreakable unity. There was no judgment, only a shared, simmering rage. Richard watched his daughter sob, and the cold, calculating businessman receded, leaving only a father whose child had been grievously wounded. The look in his eyes was terrifying in its intensity. It was the look of a man who would move heaven and earth and burn down anything in his path to exact retribution. After what felt like hours, Emma's tears subsided into shuddering breaths. She pulled away from her mother, her face blotchy, her designer gown now feeling like a costume from another life. She looked at her father, her mother, her brother. She saw her own pain reflected in their eyes, magnified by their love for her. I don't want them to get away with this, she said, her voice trembling, but with a new hard edge. I don't want your money to make this go away. I don't want to just disappear to Europe for a year to recover. Richard nodded slowly. Good. What do you want? Emma took a deep breath, the scotch and her own burgeoning anger steadying her. He used me. He wanted our name, our connections, and she wanted my life. They didn't just break my heart. They tried to humiliate our entire family. They wanted to tear down everything we've built. She looked her father dead in the eye. I want them to have nothing. I want them to lose everything they have and everything they ever hoped to have. I want them to know what it feels like to be completely and utterly alone, with no one to turn to. I want them to regret the day they ever heard the name Vance. A slow, cold smile touched Richard Vance's lips. He looked at his wife and his son. There was an unspoken agreement, a dangerous consensus that solidified in the opulent room. The time for grief was over. The time for war had begun. All right, then, Richard said, his voice calm and lethal. Let's get to work. The first light of dawn cast long, mournful shadows across the penthouse. No one had slept. The remnants of the night crystal glasses, a discarded tuxedo jacket, Emma's tear-stained dress were a stark reminder of the previous evening's wreckage. But the atmosphere had shifted. The initial shock and grief had crystallized into something harder, sharper purpose. They were gathered around the large mahogany table in Richard's study, a room that had seen the birth and death of countless multi-million-dollar deals. Usually it smelled of old leather and success. This morning it smelled of coffee and vengeance. Richard stood before a whiteboard, a dry erase marker in his hand. He had shed his tuxedo jacket and rolled up his sleeves, looking less like a hospitality mogul and more like a general plotting a campaign. Catherine, Julian, and Emma were seated each with a notepad and a cup of black coffee. "There are two targets, Liam Sterling and Isabella Rossi." Richard began, his voice devoid of emotion. "Our response must be tailored to each. We will not be emotional. We will not be rash. We will be methodical, precise, and utterly devastating. This will be a multi-front war, financial, social, and professional." He wrote Liam Sterling on the board. "His vulnerability is his ambition," Richard continued. "He's a senior vice president at Blackwood Capital. He's good at his job, but he's not indispensable. His entire identity is built on the perception of success. We will dismantle that perception brick by brick." He turned to Julian. "Julian, your first task. Liam has been bragging for months about a major merger deal he's spearheading, a pharmaceutical acquisition. He claims it will make him a partner. I want you to find out everything about that deal. The players, the numbers, the weaknesses. Use our research team. I want a full dossier on my desk by noon." Julian nodded, already typing on his phone. "Consider it done." "Catherine," Richard said, turning to his wife. "Liam has spent 2 years building a social profile. Charity boards, golf club memberships, political fundraisers, all carefully curated to align with us. You are the gatekeeper of that world. I want him to exercise. Every invitation was rescinded. Every membership is reviewed. Every friend he thinks he has needs to understand in no uncertain terms that an association with Liam Sterling is a direct affront to the Vansford family." Catherine took a sip of her coffee, a glint in her eye. "By the end of the week, the only people who will take his calls are telemarketers. I'll start with Susan Clarkson at the Children's Foundation. She owes me a favor." Richard then looked at Emma. Her eyes were red-rimmed but clear. The fragility of the night before was gone, replaced by a cold resolve. "Emma, this part is for you if you're up to it," he said gently. "It will be the most difficult, but it is the most critical. You know him. You know his secrets, his habits, his fears. I need to know his financial pressure points. Does he have debts? A gambling problem. Any private investments he's made using the expectation of our family's backing." Emma closed her eyes for a moment, accessing a part of her memory she now wished she could erase. "He has an offshore account in the Caymans. He called it his rainy day fund. He was always very secretive about it. He also co-invested in a high-risk tech startup with his old roommate, a guy named Mark Hayes. He was hoping for a big payout to prove he could make his own fortune without our help. He said it was his one shot at being his own man." The words tasted like ash in her mouth. "Excellent," Richard said, scribbling notes. "An undeclared offshore account and a high-risk side deal. That's leverage." He then wrote Isabella Rossi on the board. "Her case is different," Richard said, his tone hardening. "She doesn't have the financial or social standing of Liam. Her betrayal is personal. Therefore, our response must also be personal. She works as a fundraising manager for the Global Arts Initiative," Catherine supplied, "a prestigious non-profit. It's her dream job. She's been working towards it her entire life. And her entire career is built on a foundation of lies," Emma added, her voice low. She got that job using a letter of recommendation I convinced my father to write for her. Her resume is full of exaggerated accomplishments from internships I helped her get. A cruel but necessary idea began to form in Richard's mind. The USB drive she used is a digital fingerprint. We can prove she orchestrated the slideshow. A public accusation of corporate sabotage at a Vance event is enough to get her fired. But that's too simple. We need to discredit her so thoroughly that she can never work in that field or this city again. I can handle that, Julian said, his voice tight. Let me dig into her past. Someone who pulls a stunt like this doesn't just wake up one day and become a monster. There's a pattern. I'll find it. Good, Richard agreed. While you do that, Catherine, you will handle the social aspect. Isabella has desperately tried to ingratiate herself into Emma's circle of friends. Sever those ties. Make sure everyone knows the full extent of her deception. Catherine's smile was thin and dangerous. They'll be tripping over themselves to disown her. No one wants to be associated with that kind of treachery. Finally, Richard turned back to the board. He drew a line connecting both their names. They believe they are a team. Our final objective is to turn them against each other. When they are at their lowest, when they have lost everything, they will have no one left to blame but themselves. They will tear each other apart. That will be our true victory. Emma looked at the board, at the cold, strategic dismantling of two lives. A part of her, the woman who had been so deeply in love yesterday, felt a pang of something akin to horror. But it was quickly extinguished by the memory of Isabella's smirk and Liam's pathetic lies. They hadn't shown her any mercy. She would show them none in return. There's one more thing, Emma said, her voice steady. Isabella's apartment. The lease is in my name. When Isabella had first moved to the city, she couldn't pass the credit checks for a decent apartment. Emma had not only co-signed, but had put the lease for her beautiful West Village apartment entirely in her name, with Isabella simply transferring the rent each month. Julian let out a low whistle. Oh, that is perfect. Richard Vance looked at his daughter with a newfound respect. The soft, gentle girl he had raised was gone. In her place was a woman who had inherited his iron will. Give her the legally required 30 days' notice, Richard instructed. Effective immediately. Let her scramble to find a new place to live while the rest of her world is burning down around her. The plan was set. The pieces were in place. The Vance family, a silent, powerful machine, was now fully mobilized. Their collective grief had been channeled into a singular, focused objective. They weren't just seeking revenge. They were reasserting their power, reminding the world that while Vance might be wounded, the family's retribution would be absolute. The war had been declared, and the first shots were about to be fired. The first blow landed on Liam Sterling, less than 72 hours after the engagement party. It wasn't a cannonball, but a sniper's bullet fired from an unseen distance. He was in his office at Blackwood Capital, trying desperately to project an aura of normalcy. He'd spent the weekend dodging calls, sending frantic, unanswered texts to Emma, and drinking himself into a stupor. He'd told his boss, Arthur Blackwood, that the engagement had been called off due to irreconcilable differences, a vague and pathetic explanation that Arthur had accepted with a suspicious lack of curiosity. Liam's entire strategy was to ride it out. He believed the Vances, for all their power, were ultimately a private family who would want to avoid a messy public scandal. He figured Emma would grieve, her family would ice him out, but his career, the thing he truly valued, would remain intact. He had severely miscalculated. His focus was the Omni-Farm merger, the deal that was his ticket to a partnership and an 8-figure bonus. The final negotiations were that morning. As he walked into the boardroom, He felt a knot of anxiety, but pushed it down with a surge of arrogance. This was his domain. Here he was, the master. The opposing counsel, a team from a rival firm, was already there. But something was wrong. Their lead partner, a man named Henderson, looked grim. Liam, Henderson said, not bothering with pleasantries. "We have a problem. Our client is pulling out. The deal's off." Liam felt the blood drain from his face. Why we were dotting the I's? "We had an agreement. Our due diligence team got an anonymous tip last night," Henderson said, sliding a folder across the table. "They worked through the night to verify it. Omnifarm has been cooking its books for the last 3 quarters, hiding liabilities related to a failed clinical trial. The company is a house of cards. We're looking at massive SEC violations." Liam stared at the documents, his mind reeling. The information was detailed, irrefutable, and absolutely catastrophic. If he had pushed this deal through, it would have blown up in his face, potentially taking Blackwood Capital down with it. He would have been ruined. Instead of being hailed as a hero, he was the fool who almost walked his firm off a cliff. "Who sent this?" Liam demanded. Henderson shrugged. "Anonymous. But whoever it was, they just saved our client $1 billion and you, your entire career. You should probably thank them." But Liam knew it wasn't a favor. It was a message. Richard Vance was showing him that he could have let him walk into the fire, but chose instead to humiliate him by exposing his incompetence. The Vances didn't just have power. They had intelligence networks that made his own look like child's play. The fallout was immediate. Arthur Blackwood called him into his office. The door was closed. "What the hell happened, Liam?" Arthur demanded, his face livid. "My biggest deal of the year just evaporated, and my senior VP looks like a goddamn amateur." "Arthur, I had no idea. That's the problem." "It was your job to know," Arthur roared. "The Vances called me this morning. Richard Vance himself. He told me he was disappointed in the caliber of man I employed. He said he was rethinking his family's private wealth management portfolio with us." Liam's heart stopped. The Vance portfolio was worth hundreds of millions. Losing it would be a crippling blow to the firm. He wouldn't do that," Liam stammered. "He already has," Arthur said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "The transfer order came through an hour ago. He also mentioned quite casually that he'd be speaking to some of his friends on our board about his concerns regarding our risk management protocols." Liam understood. This was a decapitation strike. Richard wasn't just attacking him. He was making him a liability to the entire firm. "Furthermore," Arthur continued, his eyes like chips of ice, "our compliance department received an anonymous flag regarding an undeclared offshore account under your name, and a high-risk, unauthorized side investment in some tech startup. Is there anything you'd like to tell me, Liam?" Emma. It had to be Emma. She had told them. The sheer intimacy of the betrayal stunned him. She was using their shared secrets as ammunition. "That's a private matter," Liam said weakly. "Not anymore. You're a senior officer of this company. Everything you do reflects on us. You're suspended effective immediately pending a full internal investigation. Hand over your company phone and ID. Security will escort you out." To be escorted out of his own office building by security was the corporate equivalent of being tarred and feathered. As he walked past the glass-walled offices of his colleagues, he saw them avert their gazes. The whispers followed him like a plague. In the space of 3 days, he had gone from golden boy to pariah. That evening, the second wave of the attack hit. He received an email from the board of the Children's Foundation, informing him that his position was being terminated due to recent events that are not in keeping with the Foundation's values. A call to his golf club revealed his membership was under review. Invitations to 2 upcoming galas were politely but firmly rescinded via emails from apologetic assistants. Catherine Vance's social guillotine was falling. Desperate and panicked, he drove to Isabella's apartment. He needed an ally, someone to help him weather the storm. He found her frantically packing boxes, her face pale and tear-streaked. "They're kicking me out, Liam," she cried, thrusting an eviction notice into his hands. "It's in Emma's name. She's throwing me out on the street. Forget the apartment, Isabella." He shot back, his own terror making him cruel. "My career is over. They know about my offshore account. They torpedoed the Omni Farm deal. I'm suspended." "What are we going to do?" she wailed, collapsing onto a half-packed box. "We need a lawyer," he said, pacing the small apartment. "We need to fight back. Defamation, something." But even as he said it, he knew it was hopeless. Who would they sue? The Vances hadn't done anything illegal. They had simply pulled their money, shared their opinions with their friends, and pointed out his own rule-breaking to his employer. They were using the power he had so desperately wanted to marry against him with surgical precision. His phone rang. It was Mark Hayes, his partner in the tech startup. "Liam, we're ruined," Mark shouted, his voice cracking with panic. "Our angel investor just pulled out. He said he heard we were backed by unstable capital, and he wanted out immediately. The whole company is going to fold. Our seed money is gone." Liam sank onto the sofa, the phone slipping from his grasp. That had been his escape plan, his "I made it myself" fund. Now it was just another pile of ash. He looked at Isabella, who was sobbing amidst the ruins of her life. He felt no sympathy, only a rising tide of resentment. This was her fault. Her stupid, arrogant plan to humiliate Emma with that slideshow had brought this biblical wrath down upon them. "This is your fault," he hissed. "You and your dramatic, idiotic stunt. You just had to rub it in her face, didn't you? You couldn't just let it be." Isabella's head snapped up, her eyes flashing with anger. "My fault. You were the one sleeping with me. You were the one who told me you loved me, that you were going to leave her after you were married and had secured the Vance connection. Don't you dare put this on me, you coward. You, the foundation of their alliance, built on shared deceit and ambition, was beginning to crack." As they stood in the half-packed apartment, surrounded by the tangible evidence of their downfall, they didn't see 2 partners in crime. They saw the architect of their own destruction. The Vances weren't just taking away their futures. They were masterfully ensuring that Liam and Isabella would be the ones to light the match. While Liam's world imploded with the brutal efficiency of a corporate takeover, the revenge exacted on Isabella was a slower, more insidious poison. It was a masterpiece of social warfare, orchestrated by Catherine Vance, with the precision of a seasoned general. Catherine understood that for someone like Isabella, who had spent her entire adult life clawing her way into a world of privilege, public reputation was everything. The first move was quiet. Within a day of the party, Emma's closest friends, women Isabella had worked for years to befriend, began to block her number. Her texts went from delivered to sent, and were met with a digital wall of silence. Her carefully curated Instagram, once filled with photos of her laughing with Emma on yachts and at polo matches, became a ghost town. Friends untagged themselves from old photos, erasing her from their shared digital history as if she had never existed. Isabella, reeling from the eviction notice and Liam's accusations, tried to fight back. She reached out to a mutual friend, a designer named Chloe, hoping for an ally. "Chloe, thank God you picked up," Isabella said, her voice frantic. "You have to believe me. I don't know how those photos got on the screen. My USB must have been swapped. I'm being framed." Chloe's voice on the other end was cold enough to cause frostbite. "Framed, Isabella. I was standing 10 feet from the tech booth. I saw you put the drive in yourself, and then I got a call from Catherine Vance this morning. She told me everything. How you lied, how you manipulated Emma for years. Catherine is twisting things. She's trying to protect her family's perfect image." "Is she?" Chloe retorted. "Or is she protecting her daughter from a venomous snake she let into her home?" "I saw your face, Isabella. Just for a second when the first photo came up. You looked pleased. Goodbye." The line went dead. The next blow came from her employer. She received a summons to the office of the director of the Global Arts Initiative, a formidable older woman named Eleanor Vance. No relation, but a long-time friend of Catherine's. Isabella walked in, planning to offer her resignation before she could be fired, hoping to salvage some shred of dignity. Eleanor didn't give her the chance. "Isabella, we have a problem," Eleanor began. Her hands steepled on her vast oak desk. "We received a complaint this morning, backed by digital evidence, that you engaged in an act of what can only be described as corporate sabotage and public defamation at a private event held at the Astoria." "That's a lie. It's a personal matter." "It stopped being a personal matter when you used a Vance Hospitality Group event to perpetrate it," Eleanor cut her off. "Our organization relies on the goodwill of patrons and donors, many of whom are close friends with the Vance family. Your actions have made you a toxic asset. You're fired, of course. Your security pass has been deactivated. Collect your personal items from your desk. Security will escort you." The same words Liam had heard. It was a coordinated attack. But the Vances weren't done. Julian's investigation into Isabella's past had borne fruit. He'd discovered that Isabella's meteoric rise in the non-profit world wasn't just due to the Vances' help. He found a pattern. A former colleague from her first job, who was mysteriously fired for a clerical error that cost the company a major grant, an error that directly led to Isabella's promotion. An ex-boyfriend from college, an aspiring artist whose grant proposal she had helped with, only for him to be accused of plagiarism when parts of his proposal appeared verbatim in another successful application, one submitted by an acquaintance of Isabella's. Julian, with his father's blessing, didn't leak this to the tabloids. That would be too crude. Instead, he compiled a neat anonymous report and sent it to key figures in the non-profit community, board members, donors, and headhunters. He didn't make accusations. He simply laid out the facts and the suspicious coincidences. The message was clear. Isabella Rossi was a liability. A user with a history of burning those who helped her. Within a week, 2 promising job interviews Isabella had lined up were abruptly cancelled. An offer she had pending from the Metropolitan Museum was rescinded without explanation. The career she had sacrificed everything to build was not just over. It was being retroactively erased. Homeless, jobless, and friendless Isabella's world had shrunk to the 4 walls of a cheap motel room in Queens that she paid for in cash. Her savings were dwindling at an alarming rate. Her days were a blur of unanswered calls and the sickening glow of her laptop screen, where every search of her own name brought up a fresh wave of social media whispers about the engagement party psycho. Desperation began to set in. She called Liam, hoping for some support, some semblance of the partnership they had shared in their betrayal. "You have to help me, Liam," she pleaded, her voice cracking. "I have nowhere to go. I have no money." "Help you?" he sneered from the other end of the line. He was drunk. "I'm living at my parents' house in New Jersey, Isabella. My life is over because of you. I'm being audited by my own firm and probably the IRS. You want money, sell that stupid ring Emma gave you." He hung up. That was the final straw. He had turned on her completely. She was utterly, terrifyingly alone. In a last, desperate gamble, Isabella did the one thing she thought she never would. She went to see Emma. She waited outside Emma's Soho design studio, a place Isabella had once frequented, laughing over coffee and architectural plans. When Emma emerged that evening, she looked different. She was thinner, and there were shadows under her eyes, but she held herself with a new, steely posture. She didn't look like a victim. She looked like a survivor. "Emma!" Isabella called out, rushing forward. Emma stopped, her expression unreadable. She didn't flinch. She simply waited. "Please, you have to listen to me." Isabella began, tears already streaming down her face. This was her final performance, the role of the contrite, broken friend. "I am so sorry. I don't know what came over me. I was jealous, and I was stupid, and I made a terrible mistake. Liam, he manipulated me. He told me he loved me. He promised he would leave you." Emma listened silently, her arms crossed. She let Isabella exhaust her entire repertoire of excuses and crocodile tears. When Isabella finally trailed off, gasping for breath, Emma spoke, her voice calm and chillingly quiet. "A mistake, Isabella. A mistake is forgetting to pick up dry cleaning. A mistake is spilling wine on a rug. What you did was a strategic campaign of psychological warfare against someone who loved you like a sister. You didn't just want my fiancé. You wanted to annihilate my happiness in the most public way imaginable." "But I'm ruined," Isabella sobbed. "I have nothing." "Isn't that enough? Please just call off your parents. Tell them to stop. I can't take any more." Emma took a step closer, and for a moment Isabella thought she saw a flicker of the old kind Emma in her eyes. But it was just a reflection of the streetlights. What was actually there was cold, hard pity. "You think this is about my parents?" Emma asked, her voice dangerously soft. "You think I'm just hiding behind them? This entire time you've seen me as a weak, privileged girl who could be easily manipulated. That was your real mistake." This was the moment Emma had been waiting for, the final emotional checkmate. It was her move to make, not her family's. "You were right about one thing," Emma continued, her voice never rising above a conversational tone which made it all the more terrifying. "Liam did manipulate you. He is a user and a coward, but you seem to be under the impression that you were the only one he was playing with." Isabella looked up, her tear-streaked face, a mask of confusion. "What are you talking about?" "While my brother was looking into your past," Emma explained, as if discussing a boring business transaction. He found it a little too easy. "It was almost like someone wanted those skeletons in your closet to be found. And my father's investigators, when they were digging into Liam's finances, they found something interesting in his offshore account. A recurring payment made every month for the last 6 months to a private investigator." The blood drained from Isabella's face. She felt a new kind of cold, a dread that went deeper than homelessness or unemployment. "Why would Liam hire a P?" Emma asked rhetorically. "At first we thought it was to dig up dirt on my father, perhaps for some future leverage. But the PI's specialty wasn't corporate espionage. It was a personal background check. So on a hunch, we looked into who he was investigating." Emma paused, letting the silence hang in the cool night air between them. She wanted Isabella to absorb the full weight of what was coming next. He hired an investigator to dig into your life, Isabella, to find every dirty little secret, every person you'd ever backstabbed, every lie on your resume. He was compiling a dossier on you. Isabella simply stared, her mouth slightly agape. The story didn't make sense. Why? Why would he do that? Because Liam was never going to leave me for you. Emma said the words, landing like stones. You weren't the prize. You were the leverage. His plan, as far as we can piece it together, was this. He would marry me. He would secure his position in my family and in his firm. And if I ever found out about the two of you, or if you ever got too demanding, he would use the information he had on you to destroy you. He would paint you as a psychotic social climbing stalker who had an affair with him to try and break us up. He would have ruined you and played the part of the faithful, betrayed husband. He was using you to protect his investment in me. The truth was so monstrous, so much worse than simple infidelity, that Isabella felt the world tilt on its axis. She had thought she was Liam's partner in a cunning scheme. She had seen herself as the seductive, smarter woman who had won. But she was just another tool, a disposable pawn in his long game. The public humiliation she had planned for Emma was in an ironic twist of fate, the very trap Liam had been setting for her all along. No, Isabella whispered, shaking her head in denial. No, he loved me. He told me. He told you what you wanted to hear. Emma finished, her voice devoid of sympathy. And you believed him because your own greed and jealousy blinded you. You saw him as your ticket to the life you thought you deserved. But to him, you were just an insurance policy, and a disposable one at that. This was the Vances' masterstroke. It wasn't enough to ruin them separately. They had to be the instruments of their own final destruction. Emma had just handed Isabella the emotional dagger and pointed her directly at Liam's heart. The slideshow! Isabella murmured, the horror dawning on her. He looked so panicked. I thought it was because we were caught. He was panicked because you launched the attack prematurely. Emma corrected her. You exposed his leverage before he had a chance to marry me. You ruined his plan, not just my party. Do you understand now? He doesn't hate you because you hurt me. He hates you because you cost him the Vance fortune. Every tear Isabella had shed for her lost job, her lost friends, her lost apartment, was nothing compared to the profound, soul-crushing agony of this final revelation. The man for whom she had sacrificed her best friend, her morality, her entire life had been plotting her demise from the very beginning. Her grand betrayal was nothing more than a fool's errand. The last of Isabella's fights drained out of her. She crumpled to the sidewalk, not caring about the dirt on her clothes or the strange looks from passers-by. A gut-wrenching, animalistic sob escaped her lips. These weren't the performative tears she'd shed earlier. This was the sound of a spirit breaking completely. She wasn't crying because she was ruined. She was crying because she had been the author of her own ruin in the most idiotic, self-defeating way imaginable. She had been played more thoroughly than anyone. Emma looked down at the sobbing heap that was once her best friend. She felt no triumph, no satisfaction, just a vast, empty coldness. The revenge was complete, but it was a hollow victory. For what it's worth, Emma said quietly, I do hope you find your way. But you will do it far away from me, and far away from this city. You are nothing to me now. Without a backward glance, Emma Vance turned and walked away, her heels clicking decisively on the pavement, leaving Isabella Rossi to drown in the ruins of a life she had torched with her own hands. The mistress was left in tears, not because of what the Vance family had done to her, but because of the devastating truth of what she and the man she'd done it for had done to themselves. The final act of the drama played out not with a bang, but with the pathetic implosion of a failed alliance. Fueled by Emma's devastating revelation, Isabella attempted one last desperate act of vengeance. She went to the press and to Liam's firm Blackwood Capital, armed with texts and emails, painting herself as the innocent victim of a manipulative predator. It was a gambit that might have worked had the Vances not already made their final surgical move. An anonymous tip had already landed Liam's own dossier on Isabella in the hands of his employers. When Isabella arrived with her story, she was met not with sympathy, but with cold, hard evidence of a wider conspiracy. The narrative was no longer about a simple affair. It was about two sociopaths who had plotted a malicious scheme. Liam was promptly fired for gross misconduct, his reputation permanently destroyed. Isabella's claims were dismissed as the vindictive lies of a co-conspirator, leaving her utterly discredited. Their wicked seam tore completely. After a final vitriolic exchange of texts, each blaming the other for their shared oblivion, they vanished from the world they had so desperately wanted to conquer. Liam retreated to his parents' home in New Jersey, a disgraced pariah. Isabella, broke and blacklisted, was rumored to have returned to the quiet Ohio town she once scorned, her grand ambitions reduced to nothing. In the Vance penthouse, a somber quiet settled. The war was over, but the victory felt strangely hollow. One evening, Emma found her father in his study, looking out over the city. "It's done," she said, more a statement than a question. "It's done," he affirmed. "They got what they deserved." "Did they?" Emma asked, her voice laced with exhaustion. "I thought I would feel vindicated, but I just feel empty." Richard turned, his expression softening. "Revenge is a tool, Emma, not a prize. It's a way of cauterizing a wound to stop the bleeding. It doesn't heal the scar. Only time and purpose can do that. What you're feeling is the space you've cleared. Now you must decide what to build in its place." His words resonated deep within her. For weeks her life had been defined by destruction. Now she needed to create. The next morning, she made an announcement. "I'm taking the Singapore project," she told her family. The Vance Hospitality Group's new eco-luxury hotel was an ambitious 2-year undertaking she had previously put on hold. It was the perfect antidote to the poison of the last few months. This wasn't an escape. It was a reclamation of her identity. 6 months later, Emma stood on the bustling construction site in Singapore. Covered in a light sheen of sweat and dust, she reviewed blueprints, pointing and giving directions with a newfound authority. The skeletal framework of the hotel rose against the tropical sky, a testament to creativity and perseverance. She thought of Liam and Isabella, two ghosts from a past life, forever trapped in the ashes of their own making. They had been so consumed with taking her life that they had forgotten to build their own. A small smile touched her lips. She looked up from the plans and towards the horizon, where the setting sun painted the sky in brilliant hues of gold and orange. The air was thick with the promise of tomorrow. She was no longer a victim or an avenger. She was an architect building a new foundation entirely her own. For the first time in a very long time, Emma Vance felt free. And so Emma Vance built her new life from the ashes of betrayal, proving that the greatest revenge isn't just seeing your enemies fall, but rising so far above them they become insignificant. This story is a powerful reminder that while treachery can shatter a life in an instant, the bonds of a loyal family and the strength of one's own character are unbreakable. They didn't just get even. They redefined the game. What happened to Liam and Isabella serves as a dark, cautionary tale about the true cost of greed and deceit. If this story of justice and resilience resonated with you, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear that strength can be found in the deepest of wounds. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next real-life drama. We want to hear from you in the comments below. Do you think the Vance family's revenge was justified, or did they go too far? What would you have done? Thanks for listening. What is the ultimate betrayal? Is it a secret affair, or is it something far more sinister? For Serena Moreau, wife of billionaire tycoon Zephan Moreau, the nightmare began not with the discovery of an affair, but with an unthinkable demand. He made her share a room with his mistress. He called it a modern solution. He called it rational. But trapped in a remote Aspen mansion, with no way out, the two women would soon discover that Zephan's cruelty was not the real secret. The real secret was the reason they were both there, and it was a truth far more dangerous than simple infidelity. What the mistress confessed that night would change everything. The air in Aspen was different. It was thin and sharp, smelling of pine and money. For Serena Moreau, it had once been the scent of escape, of romance, of weekends, spent wrapped in cashmere, and love in the sprawling mountain estate Zephan had built for them. Now, it was the scent of a prison. She stood on the terrazzo balcony of the Aegis, a name Zephan had chosen for its meaning, protection, sponsorship control. The house was a marvel of modern architecture, all glass and steel and warm cedar cantilevered over the mountainside with a breathtaking view of the roaring Fork Valley. It was a fortress of solitude, and tonight Serena had never felt more alone. Zephan, her husband of 12 years, was a titan. Zephan Moreau wasn't just rich. He was a force of nature. He'd built a financial tech empire from a single algorithm he'd coded in his dorm room. He had a cover story smile, a voice that could soothe foreign dignitaries and eviscerate board members in the same breath, and an ego as vast and cold as the mountain range before them. For years, Serena had been the perfect partner. The elegant, stable art historian who softened his rough edges, hosted his galas, and raised their son Leo, who was now safely away at boarding school in Switzerland, shielded from the chill that had crept into their marriage. The chill had started as a subtle draft, late nights at the office, hushed phone calls, a distance in his eyes that no amount of love could seem to bridge. Then the draft became a bitter wind. Tonight was supposed to be a reconciliation. That's what he'd called it. Just the two of us, Sarah. Let's fix this. Let's go back to the Aegis where it all began. She had agreed, clinging to a desperate strand of hope. But the moment his private jet touched down, the hope began to wither. His smile didn't reach his eyes. His touch was proprietary, not passionate. He moved through their home not as a husband, but as a warden inspecting his property. He was pouring them both a glass of vintage Bordeaux when the chime of the main gate echoed through the cavernous living room. Serena frowned. "Are we expecting someone?" Zephan swirled the wine in his glass, his back to her. The reflection in the floor-to-ceiling window showed a man perfectly composed. "A guest. A business associate of sorts. There's a complication I need to manage in person." "Here, Zephan, you promised. Business never sleeps. Serena, you know that." The excuse was worn thin from years of use. The house manager, a stern woman named Mrs. Davies, showed the guest in. and then the world tilted on its axis for Serena Moreau. The woman standing in the grand entryway was young, perhaps 25. She was stunning in that effortless way Serena felt she could no longer compete with long, dark hair, eyes the color of whiskey, and a lithe figure draped in a simple but obviously expensive dress. She clutched her handbag like a shield, her gaze darting around the room before it landed on Zephan, and then with a flicker of something unreadable on Serena. "Irene, you're here." Zephan said, his voice smooth as silk. He didn't move to greet her, merely gestured with his glass. "Serena, this is Irene Rossi. She'll be staying with us for a while." Serena's own wine glass felt slick in her hand. The name wasn't familiar, but the situation was suffocatingly clear. This was no business associate. This was the reason for the late nights, the hushed calls, the soulless chasm that had opened up between them. The mistress. He hadn't even bothered to hide her. He had brought her here, to their home. A wave of nausea and white-hot rage washed over her. She placed her glass down with a hand that trembled almost imperceptibly. "Zephan, may I have a word with you in private?" "There's no need for secrets, Serena," he said, turning to face her fully, now his expression one of magnanimous, infuriating calm. "That's the point. I'm tired of secrets. I care for Irene, and I am still married to you. I see no reason why we can't come to a modern arrangement." Serena stared at him, speechless. The audacity, the sheer breathtaking arrogance of it was like a physical blow. "A modern arrangement? Are you insane?" "I'm a pragmatist," he corrected. "Irene is in a difficult position, and I need to keep her close. You are my wife. This house is large enough for everyone. We can be adults about this." The woman Irene flushed a deep crimson. She looked at the floor, at the ceiling, anywhere but at Serena. She was a participant in this humiliation, but her discomfort was palpable. "No," Serena said, her voice low and shaking with fury. "No, Zephan. Absolutely not. Either she leaves or I do." Zephan's smile finally vanished. His eyes hardened. "Don't be dramatic, Serena. Where would you go? Your accounts are managed by me. Your car is here. We are, for all intents and purposes, snowed in for the next couple of days, if the forecast is to be believed. You're not going anywhere." He was stating facts, not making threats. That was what made it so terrifying. He had considered every angle. He had trapped her. "Then she can sleep in one of the other 12 bedrooms in this ridiculous mausoleum." Serena shot back, her voice gaining strength. Zephan took a slow sip of his wine. He savored it, drawing out the moment, letting the tension coil in the silent room. "Unfortunately, that's not possible," he said with a sigh, as if discussing a minor inconvenience. "I had the East Wing and the staff quarters closed for the season to save on utilities. And the master suite, well, the radiant heating in the floor is on the fritz. The technicians can't come out until Tuesday. It's freezing in there." He paused, letting the lie settle. "There's only one viable bedroom left in the guest wing. It has 2 queen beds. I trust you and Irene can share." Serena felt the blood drain from her face. It wasn't just a demand. It was a punishment. A deliberate, calculated act of psychological warfare. He wanted to break her. He wanted to rub her face in her own replacement, to force her into an intimate puss with the woman who had shattered her life, to demonstrate his absolute and total power over both of them. She looked from Zephan's cold, triumphant face to Irene's shocked and horrified one. The younger woman's mouth was slightly agape, her whiskey-colored eyes wide with what looked like genuine panic. For the first time, Serena saw a crack in the mistress's facade. She looked as trapped as Serena felt. "You're a monster." Serena whispered the words, barely audible. Zephyr just smiled. "I'm a problem solver, my love. Now Mrs. Davies will show you both to your room. I have some calls to make." He turned and walked away, leaving the two women standing in the marble hall. The silence between them a deafening roar of humiliation, betrayal, and a terrifying shared unknown. The gilded cage had just shrunk to the size of a single room. The guest suite was at the far end of the west wing, a part of the house Serena rarely visited. It was designed for important visitors, decorated with the same impersonal luxury as a five-star hotel. Two queen beds dressed in identical crisp white linens sat on opposite sides of the room, separated by a wide expanse of pale grey carpet. A gas fireplace was set into one wall, its flames dancing silently behind a sheet of glass. The only other door led to a massive ensuite bathroom, a cavern of marble and chrome. Mrs. Davies had deposited their luggage, Serena's vintage Louis Vuitton, and Irene's trendy new-looking Rimowa, and left without a word, her expression unreadable, but her disapproval hanging in the air. And then they were alone. Serena walked to the window and stared out at the swirling snow, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. The cold from the glass seemed to seep into her bones. She could feel Irene's presence behind her, a nervous energy that filled the space. She refused to look at her. Acknowledging her would be to acknowledge the reality of this nightmare. Minutes stretched into an eternity. The only sounds were the whisper of the wind outside and the synthetic flicker of the fireplace. Serena's mind raced. She catalogued every asset, every friend she could call, every possible escape route. But Zephyr was right. Her money was tied up in joint accounts he controlled. Her closest friends were his friends, too, couples who benefited from his largesse. And the snow was getting heavier, blanketing the mountain in a soft, impenetrable prison. I'm sorry," a small voice said from behind her. Serena flinched. The apology was so unexpected, so contrary to the image of the brazen homewrecker she had built in her mind, that it momentarily broke through her rage. She turned slowly. Irene was standing by her suitcase, wringing her hands. She looked small and lost in the oversized room. Her earlier confidence had evaporated, replaced by a raw vulnerability. "Sorry." Serena's voice was ice. "What exactly are you sorry for? For sleeping with my husband, or for having the audacity to show up in my home?" Irene winced. "Both. All of it. I didn't know. He didn't tell me you would be here. He said you were in Europe." "He's a liar," Serena spat. "What else is new? And this?" Irene gestured around the room at the two beds, her voice trembling slightly. "This is insane. I told him no. I begged him to let me stay in a hotel in town. And yet here you are," Serena said, unmoved. "You could have refused to get in the car." "Could I?" Irene asked, and there was a strange, desperate edge to her voice. "You don't know him." Serena let out a bitter laugh. "Oh, I can assure you I do. I know every calculated smile, every manipulative promise. I know the man who builds you a palace and then turns it into a prison." A tense silence fell again. Serena began to pace the soft carpet, doing nothing to soothe the frantic energy coursing through her. She needed a plan. She needed leverage. The humiliation was a fire in her gut, but beneath it, a cold, hard resolve was beginning to form. She would not let him break her. Dinner was a fresh circle of hell. Zephyr had it served in the formal dining room, a vast space with a table that could seat 30. The three of them sat at one end, the distance between them feeling like miles. Zephan played the part of the gracious host, talking about market trends and a new acquisition as if this were the most normal dinner party in the world. He directed questions to both of them, forcing them into a grotesque parody of civility. Serena ate mechanically the exquisite food tasting like cardboard. She answered in monosyllables. Irene, however, seemed to be trying. She spoke about her background in marketing, about a project she was supposedly working on for one of Zephan's subsidiary companies. She was playing her part, the bright young protégé. But Serena really watched her for the first time. She noticed the way Irene's hand shook when she reached for her water glass, the way she flinched almost imperceptibly when Zephan's voice sharpened, the way she never ever met his gaze for more than a second. This wasn't the behavior of a triumphant mistress basking in her victory. This was the behavior of a hostage. After the ordeal of dinner, Zephan dismissed them as if they were children. "I've got a conference call with Hong Kong. You two should probably get some rest. It's been a long day." The condescension was suffocating. Back in the shared room, the tension was somehow worse. The pretense was gone. It was just two women, a wife and a mistress, trapped in a room by the man who had ruined both their lives in different ways. Serena went into the bathroom and ran the shower, the water scalding hot. She just stood in the steam for a long time, letting the noise drown out the world. She wasn't crying. The shock had frozen her tears. She was thinking. The woman in the next room was not her primary enemy. She was a symptom. The disease was Zephan, and to fight a disease you had to understand it. When she emerged, wrapped in a thick fret robe, Irene was sitting on the edge of her bed, still in her dinner dress. She looked up, her expression pleading. "Can we please just talk?" Irene asked. "I know you hate me, and you have every right to. But you need to know that this is not what it looks like." Serena paused, her hand on her own suitcase. "And what does it look like, Irene?" "It looks like I'm a gold digger who swooped in to steal your husband," she said, her voice cracking. "It looks like I'm happy about this. I'm not. I'm terrified." "Terrified of what?" "That his wife is going to make a scene," Serena scoffed. "No," Irene said, shaking her head, her dark hair falling around her face. "I'm terrified of him." That stopped Serena cold. She looked at Irene, at her genuine fear, and felt the first flicker of something other than hatred. It was a faint, unsettling curiosity. "He's not just a cheat, Serena," Irene whispered, looking towards the closed door as if Zephan could hear them. "He's dangerous. The reason he brought me here. The reason he's forcing us into this room. It's not about an affair. It's about control. He needs to know where both of us are at all times." Serena sank onto her own bed, her legs suddenly weak. "What are you talking about?" Irene took a deep, shuddering breath. "He told me he was going to leave you. He promised me a future, a legitimate career. He made me sign things." "Sign things? What things?" "I don't know." Irene's voice rose in panic before she clamped it down. "Business documents, incorporation papers for shell companies, financial transfers. He said it was for tax efficiency. He said it was to build my own portfolio, to give me independence. I was naive. I was stupid. I believed him." She finally looked up, her whiskey-colored eyes shining with unshed tears. "Last week," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "I saw an email on his laptop. He left it open by accident. It was from his lawyer. It was about an SEC investigation, about fraud. They're closing in on him, Serena. The company. It's a house of cards, and the name on all the fraudulent accounts the person listed as the director of the shell corporations funneling the money. It's me. The air left Serena's lungs. The betrayal, the humiliation, the heartbreak of the last few hours suddenly seemed trivial. This wasn't about love or lust. This was about a crime. He's setting you up. Serena breathed, the pieces clicking into place with sickening clarity. He's going to make you the scapegoat. Yes, Irene sobbed, the tears finally coming. And he brought me here to make sure I don't run. He brought you here to distract you, to humiliate you, to keep you off balance so you don't start looking into his finances. And he put us in this room together because he's a sadist who thinks he controls everyone like pieces on a chessboard. Serena stared at the young woman crying on the opposite bed. The lines that had been so clearly drawn, wife-mistress. Victim-villain were blurring into a terrifying new picture. They weren't rivals. They were co-conspirators in a plot they didn't even know they were a part of. They were two different keys to the same man's cage, and he had just locked them inside it together. That night, in that cold, luxurious room, the mistress confessed everything. And Serena Moreau realized her marriage wasn't just over. Her life, and the life of the woman she was supposed to hate, was in imminent danger. The confession hung in the air between them, thick and poisonous. Irene's sobs subsided into shuddering breaths, her face buried in her hands. The meticulously constructed world Serena had inhabited for over a decade had just been dynamited, and in its place was a smoking crater of lies, fraud, and a danger so profound it made her skin crawl. For a long moment, Serena said nothing. Her mind trained to analyze the subtleties of art history. Provenance forgeries' hidden meanings was now working at lightning speed, recontextualizing her entire life with Zephan. The business trips that lasted for weeks, his obsession with privacy and security, the way he'd systematically taken over her finances years ago under the guise of making things easier for her. It wasn't control for the sake of ego. It was the meticulous work of a master criminal covering his tracks. She finally stood up and walked into the marble bathroom. She returned with a box of tissues and a glass of water, placing them on the bedside table next to Irene. It was a simple gesture, but it was a tectonic shift. It was an act of humanity. Irene looked up, her eyes red and swollen. "You probably still think I'm lying." "No," Serena said, her voice calm and steady in a way that surprised even herself. The panic had receded, replaced by an icy, diamond-hard clarity. "I've seen him talk his way out of things his whole life. I've seen him charm regulators and bully competitors, setting up a naive, ambitious young woman to be his fall guy. That sounds exactly like something he would do." She sat on the edge of her own bed, facing Irene directly. The room was no longer a battleground for two rivals. It was a war room. "Tell me everything," Serena commanded, her tone leaving no room for argument. "Every document you signed, every name you remember, every conversation that seemed strange. Don't leave anything out." For the next 2 hours, with the artificial fire flickering and the real storm raging outside, Irene talked. She spoke of how she'd met Zephan at a tech conference where she was a junior marketing assistant. He'd been the keynote speaker. He'd taken an interest in her, flattered her become her mentor. He painted a picture of a loveless, sexless marriage, portraying Serena as a cold, detached woman, only interested in his money, a classic cruel lie that made Serena's stomach clench. He bought her a small, chic apartment in the city, but the lease was in a corporate name. He gave her a credit card, but it was a supplementary card to an account she couldn't see. He showered her with gifts and promises, all while slowly, methodically weaving a web of legal and financial entanglement around her. He'd made her sign powers of attorney directors' consent forms and wire transfer authorizations, always in a rush, always with a plausible explanation. "It's just a formality for the new venture, darling. I'm putting it in your name to empower you." "The company is called Ethelred Holdings," Irene said, wiping her eyes. "I thought the name was strange. He said it was an old Anglo-Saxon king." Serena's blood ran cold. "Ethelred the Unready," she whispered. "His moniker means ill-advoed or poorly counselled. It's a historian's joke, a sick, arrogant joke. He was mocking you from the very beginning." Irene let out a sound that was half sob, half laugh, of disbelief. "My God." "The email you saw," Serena pressed. "What else did it say?" "Who was it from?" "His personal lawyer, a man named Marcus Thorne," Irene recalled. "It said something about accelerating the timeline and finalizing the asset transfer to the primary holding before the end of the fiscal quarter. And it said the IR contingency is in place. I think I'm the IR contingency, Irina Rossi." It was all there. A meticulously crafted plan to implode his company, pin the blame on his mistress, and disappear with the clean assets. Zephan wasn't just a cheat and a fraud. He was planning to vanish. This reconciliation weekend wasn't a reconciliation at all. It was his final act. He needed to keep both of them, the wife he was leaving and the scapegoat he was framing, under his direct supervision until the final wire transfer was complete. "His office," Serena said, her mind racing. "His main computer is in his office here. It's where he does his real work. He thinks no one can get into it. It's protected by a biometric scanner." "He's not wrong," Irene said hopelessly. "We'll never get in. He has 2 levels of security." Serena explained the long-forgotten details of their life together, suddenly becoming vital clues. The fingerprint scanner on the door, and then another password on the machine itself. But I know his weakness. He's arrogant. He believes no one is smart enough to beat him, so his fail-safes are built on that arrogance. She looked at Irene, a plan forming audacious and terrifying. He uses his right thumbprint for the scanner, but he's paranoid about being forced to open it. Years ago, he told me he set it up so that his left thumbprint acts as a duress print. If it's used, it opens the door, but silently triggers a full data wipe of the server and sends an alert to his security team. Irene's eyes widened. "So how does that help us?" "Because—" Serena continued, her voice dropping to a whisper. "The password for the computer itself is something he would never imagine I'd remember. It's the acquisition date of the first painting he ever bought for me. A small Degas sketch. He was so proud. He called it the first brick in our empire. He's a sentimental monster, a narcissist. His password will be tied to his own story, his own success." A fragile, dangerous hope began to dawn in the room. "But we still can't get past the thumbprint scanner," Irene pointed out. Serena stood up and walked over to the bar cart in the corner of the room where Mrs. Davies had dutifully stocked crystal glasses and bottles of spirits. She picked up a heavy, empty Bordeaux glass, the same type Zephan had been drinking from earlier. "When he was talking to us at dinner," Serena said, her voice barely audible, "he was holding his glass like this." She wrapped her hand around it, her thumb pressed firmly against the crystal. "He gestures when he talks. He's theatrical. He left prints all over it. She looked at Irene. He thinks you're a marketing girl, and he thinks I'm a heartbroken wife. He wouldn't imagine in a million years that we'd be in here doing this. The plan was insane. It involved lifting a perfect thumbprint from a wine glass, bypassing a multi-million-dollar security system, and accessing the server of a paranoid genius, all while he was in the same house. It was impossible. "We can't," Irene whispered, shaking her head. "He's going to ruin your life and leave you to rot in a federal prison," Serena stated, her voice devoid of emotion. "He's going to take every last cent and disappear, leaving me with nothing but public humiliation and a mountain of his debt. I don't know about you, but I am not going to let that happen." She held out her hand to Irene. It wasn't a gesture of friendship. It was the gesture of a general sealing an alliance on the eve of a battle she had no choice but to fight. For a long second, Irene just stared at her hand. Then, with a new determination, hardening her own features, she reached out and clasped it. Her hand was cold and trembling, but her grip was firm. "Okay," Irene said. "What do we do first?" The Aegis was silent, a sleeping beast of glass and steel. The only sounds were the howl of the wind and the frantic beating of two hearts. The clock on the bedside table read 17 a.m. Zefan's call with Hong Kong would be over, and he would be asleep. He was a creature of habit, always taking a mild sedative on high-stress nights to ensure 8 hours of deep, dreamless rest. It was a detail Serena knew from years of sleeping beside a man who treated his own body like a machine to be optimized. Tonight, his habit was their window of opportunity. Their first task was lifting the print. Serena's mind, usually filled with the chemical compositions of oil paints, was now recalling scenes from spy movies and crime shows. They needed a fine powder and a brush. "Makeup," Irene whispered, her eyes lighting up. She scrambled to her purse and pulled out a small cosmetics bag. She produced a compact of translucent setting powder, fine as dust, and a soft, feathery blush brush. It was perfect. Working with the surgical precision of a bomb disposal expert, Serena held the wine glass Zefan had used, which she'd discreetly retrieved from the dining room before Mrs. Davies could clear it. Under the focused beam of her phone's flashlight, she could see the smudges. She barely breathed as Irene delicately dusted the powder over the most promising print, a clear, full whirl left by his right thumb. With exquisite care, she blew away the excess. The print stood out, a ghostly white map of his identity. "Now what?" Irene whispered, her voice taut with tension. "Tape," Serena said. "Clear tape." They found a roll in a desk drawer. Serena pressed a piece firmly over the print and peeled it back. The delicate white powder adhered to the sticky surface, a perfect transference. They had his key. The second problem was the scanner itself. It wouldn't read a flat print on a piece of tape. It needed the depth and conductivity of a real finger. "This is going to sound crazy," Serena said, her mind working furiously. "But I read about it once. Gelatin, like jello, if it's dense enough, it can mimic the capacitance of human skin." A frantic search of the guest suite's mini-kitchen yielded a packet of unflavored gelatin meant for making fancy desserts. Their luck was holding. Working in the bathroom with the door closed and a towel stuffed underneath, they mixed the gelatin with warm water, creating a thick, viscous goo. They carefully placed the tape print side up at the bottom of a small, shallow dish and poured the gelatin mixture over it. "Now we need it to set, fast," Serena said. Irina grabbed the ice bucket. They nested the dish in a bath of ice, their hands touching as they held it steady. Two women from opposite ends of a man's life, now united in a desperate, surreal act of rebellion. While they waited, Serena prepped Irene. The password is a date, 10/27/2012, October 27th, 2012. He bought me the Degas at a Sotheby's auction. He'll have typed it as WANT272012. No slashes, no dashes. He thinks it's clever because it's personal, but his real security is his arrogance. After 20 agonizing minutes, the gelatin was firm. With a craft knife from a stationery set, Serena carefully trimmed the excess carving out a small rubbery pad with a perfect thumbprint embedded in its surface. It was crude, but it might just work. Now came the hardest part. Zephan's office was on the main floor, situated between the master suite and the library. They had to move through the house without making a sound. The Aegis was a smart home, its systems all networked. A motion sensor tripped at the wrong time, a light turned on unexpectedly. Any deviation could trigger an alert on Zephan's phone. Dressed in dark clothing socks on their feet, they slipped out of their room. The hallway was a canyon of shadows. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like a gunshot. Serena led the way, her knowledge of the house's layout, their only map. She knew which floor panels groaned, which doors whispered on their hinges. They reached the office door. It was a solid slab of reinforced oak. Beside it, a small, dark glass panel glowed with a faint green light. The biometric reader. Serena's heart hammered against her ribs. She held up the gelatin mold. Her hand was shaking so badly that Irene had to steady it with her own. Together, they pressed the makeshift thumb to the scanner. The green light blinked. Nothing happened. "It's not working." Irene breathed, her voice laced with panic. "The pressure," Serena realized. "It needs to be exact." They tried again, pressing a little harder, holding it perfectly flat. The light blinked green again, then turned solid. There was a soft, almost inaudible click as the magnetic lock disengaged. They both froze, listening. Silence. They had done it. Slipping inside, Serena closed the door gently behind them. The office was Zephan's inner sanctum. One wall was a bank of monitors currently dark. A massive obsidian-like desk dominated the room, his top-of-the-line computer sitting on it, like an altar. "You stand at the door," Serena whispered to Irene. "If you hear anything, even a sigh, you cough. Twice." Irene nodded, her face pale in the gloom, and took her position. Serena sat in Zephan's chair. It was still warm. A wave of revulsion washed over her. She took a deep breath and woke the computer. The screen flared to life, asking for a password. Her fingers trembled as she typed 1272012. She hit enter. Access granted. The desktop appeared. It was clean, organized, ruthlessly efficient. There were folders for his legitimate businesses, his portfolio, his travel schedule. But Serena was looking for the one that didn't belong. Tucked away, disguised with a generic name, Legacy Project, was the folder she knew had to be it. She clicked it open. It was a labyrinth of subfolders and password-protected files. But Zephan's arrogance had tripped him up again. In a text file named Instructions, meant for his lawyer, Marcus Thorne, in case of his death or disappearance, was a list of all the passwords. Serena's hands flew across the keyboard. She plugged in a tiny, high-capacity flash drive she'd found in the desk. She opened files, her eyes scanning documents that made her blood run cold. There it was, Ethelred Holdings. Scans of the documents Irene had signed. A complex flowchart of money, moving from Zephan's public company, through a dozen offshore accounts, and finally consolidating into a single untraceable crypto wallet. And then she found the smoking gun, a folder labeled Contingency. Inside was a meticulously prepared dossier on Irene Rossi. A fabricated history of gambling debts, a forged psychological evaluation suggesting a personality prone to compulsive behavior, and a series of emails expertly faked between an account set up in Irene's name and known money launderers. He hadn't just been planning to frame her. He'd been building a completely false but believable narrative to hand-deliver to the FBI. But there was one more file, a folder labeled with a single letter E. Her stomach plummeted. She clicked it. It contained a single password-protected document. The password also in the instructions file was Tanzanite, the name of the gemstone in the earrings he'd given her on their first anniversary. She opened it. It was a draft of a press release. Zephan Moreau, grieving husband, pledges to cooperate with authorities after wife's tragic suicide. It went on to detail his profound shock and sorrow upon discovering that his beloved wife, Serena, had taken her own life after discovering she was embroiled in a massive fraud scheme orchestrated by a trusted family friend, Irene Rossi. It painted him as the ultimate victim, betrayed by the two women closest to him. He wasn't going to leave her with debt and humiliation. He was going to leave her dead. Whether he planned to stage it himself or simply drive her to it didn't matter. This was his end game. Pin the crime on Irene and erase the one person who knew him best, his wife, under the cover of a tragic, believable story. Suddenly, from the doorway, came a soft but sharp sound. Cough. Cough. Serena's head snapped up. Her blood turned to ice. She yanked the flash drive from the port just as the doorknob began to turn. The soft metallic click of the doorknob turning was a sound that seemed to physically sever the threads of time. The world stopped. In that single suspended moment, Serena's mind, which had been a whirlwind of frantic activity, went utterly and unnervingly silent. She saw everything with a crystalline clarity, the flash drive in her hand, the faint glow of the monitor she'd just blanked, the terrified, wide-eyed stare of Irene, who looked like a fawn caught in the crosshairs. Then the door swung inward, a silent blade slicing through the sanctuary they had briefly created. Zephan stood framed in the doorway, a dark spectre against the muted light of the hall. He wasn't in his sleeping attire, a detail that struck Serena with the force of a physical blow. He was dressed in dark grey trousers and a form-fitting black cashmere sweater. He was awake. He had been waiting. The sedative, the predictable habit she had banked on, was just another assumption he had allowed her to make. His eyes, chips of obsidian in the low light, did not immediately accuse. They swept the room with a theatrical slowness, absorbing every detail. He was a predator, entering a den, cataloguing the scene, savoring the fear he knew was radiating from his prey. Trouble sleeping? He asked, his voice a low, melodic murmur that was more chilling than any shout. He took a single deliberate step into the room. Serena's body moved before her mind could consent. She shoved the flash drive deep into the pocket of her silk robe, the tiny, sharp-edged device a damning weight against her thigh. Her other hand found the back of the leather office chair, gripping it until her knuckles turned white. "I could ask the same of you," she managed to reply. Her voice was a stranger's thin, reedy, but miraculously it did not break. Beside her, Irene seemed to shrink into the wall, trying to make herself invisible. Zephan's lips curved into a smile that held no warmth, no humor. It was a predator's smile, a baring of teeth. Let's just say I had a feeling. Premonition. A sixth sense that things in my home were out of place. His gaze drifted to a small side table where Serena had carelessly left the 2 wine glasses, the one he had used at dinner, and the one she had sipped from, both integral parts of their ruse. Getting thirsty, I wasn't aware you'd developed a taste for my Bordeaux. The lie came to her clumsy and desperate. Irene felt faint. The altitude. I came to get her a glass of water. Zephan's gaze shifted to Irene, and his eyes narrowed with a look of profound, dismissive contempt. Faint you, my dear, have never fainted in your life. You're far too resilient for such theatrics. He turned his attention back to Serena, taking another slow step toward the massive desk that separated them. You've always been a terrible liar, Sarah. Did you know that your heart isn't built for deceit? It's one of the things I used to find so charmingly provincial about you. He stopped directly in front of his desk, the expanse of polished obsidian reflecting his dark form. He ran a hand over its smooth, cold surface, then tapped the large monitor. It remained dark. But you're learning, he continued, his voice dropping lower, becoming more intimate, more menacing. It seems you've found a new tutor. He flicked his eyes toward Irene again. Though I can't imagine what she could possibly teach you besides vulgar ambition. He let the silence hang in the air for a moment before delivering the finishing blow. Did you really think I wouldn't have a silent tripwire on my office door? An alert that pings my watch if it's opened between midnight and 6 a.m. Without my specific override, I designed the system myself. I've been standing in the darkness of the hall for the last 5 minutes, listening to you scurry around in my world, my private personal world. Irene let out a small, choked gasp, a sound of pure despair. The illusion of their secrecy was shattered. They weren't clever rebels who had outsmarted the king. They were mice he had allowed to run through his maze simply for his own amusement. So disappointing. Zephan sighed, looking at Irene with a mock sadness. I saw such potential in you. I gave you a lifestyle you could only dream of, and I was going to give you a clean exit. All I asked for in return was a little loyalty. Loyalty. Irene's voice, though trembling, was laced with a newfound acid. The terror was still there, but it was now competing with a righteous fury. You call framing me for fraud and leaving me to rot in a federal prison loyalty. Zephan actually laughed, a genuine low, humorless chuckle that echoed in the quiet room. Oh, don't be so dramatic. It was a generous severance package, all things considered. A few years in a minimum security facility with the best lawyers my money could buy to argue for a reduced sentence. You would have been comfortable. And you would have been infamous. Some people would kill for that kind of notoriety. His gaze, cold and absolute, snapped back to Serena. He was done with the games. The drive, Serena. Give it to me. I don't know what you're talking about. She repeated the words, feeling foolish and hollow, even as she said them. She took a step back, her leg bumping into the desk behind her. Don't, he hissed, the politeness vanishing completely. Insult my intelligence again. It's the only reason you'd have the guts to come in here. You and the little fool found a conscience and decided to play hero. A noble but monumentally stupid gesture. He began to round the desk, his movements slow, deliberate, closing the distance between them. The room suddenly felt very small, the air thick and hard to breathe. Hand it over, he said, his voice now a low command. And we can discuss how this ends for you. Perhaps not with the tragedy I had envisioned. That's off the table now. You've complicated things, but we can arrange a quiet, comfortable divorce, a generous settlement even. There would have to be an unbreakable non-disclosure agreement, of course, a gag order. But you'd be alive. You'd be free. That's a better deal than she was getting. He was trying to split them to offer her a golden bridge while leaving Irene to fall. It was a classic Zephan maneuver. But looking at Irene's terrified but defiant face, Serena felt an unexpected surge of solidarity. They were past this. He couldn't play them against each other anymore. This was it. The end game. Her mind was a maelstrom of fear. The door was blocked. The windows were sealed. He was bigger, stronger, and in this house he was a god. Her eyes darted around the room, desperately searching for a weapon, an escape route, anything. They snagged on a small, sleek remote control resting in its cradle on the corner of the desk. It wasn't for the television or the stereo. It was the master controller for the entire house. The Aegis itself. A memory flooded her vivid and complete. Zephan, years ago, standing in this very spot, proudly demonstrating his creation. He'd been so arrogant, so pleased with himself. The whole house becomes a vault in under 10 seconds, Sarah. Nothing gets in, and nothing gets out. He'd laughed. I even gave you a voice override command, in case of emergencies. He had set the command as a private joke between them, something from a shared love of mythology, never believing she, his docile, artistic wife, would ever have cause or courage to use it. His arrogance. It was always his fatal flaw. You know, Zephan, she said, her voice finding a strange new calm as the plan crystallized in her mind. I remember when you were designing this place. You were so proud of the security systems. He paused his advance, frowning, thrown off by her sudden non sequitur. It's the most secure private residence in North America, a necessary precaution for a man of my stature. You called it your fortress. Serena continued her hand, subtly shifting along the back of the chair, edging her sideways closer to the desk, closer to the remote. You boasted that nothing could get past the emergency lockdown feature. The frown on Zephan's face deepened as understanding followed by a flash of pure fury began to dawn. He saw where she was going. He saw the remote. He lunged. But desperation is a powerful fuel. Serena was faster. She didn't run for the door. She dove for the desk, her fingers closing around the cool, smooth plastic of the remote, an instant before he could grab her. She held it aloft like a torch and screamed the command, pouring every ounce of her fear, rage, and betrayal into the words. Aegis, execute, protocol, Cerberus. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the house roared to life. A deep mechanical groan reverberated through the walls, followed by a series of deafening concussive clangs. One by one, heavy steel shutters slammed down over the massive windows, the sound like a row of guillotines dropping. The serene mountain view vanished, replaced by impenetrable metal. The office was plunged into absolute suffocating darkness. A final decisive clang echoed as a shutter sealed the office door. The magnetic locks engaging with a heavy thud. The world went black. The only sounds were their ragged breathing in the dark and the faint, high-pitched whine of the emergency power kicking in for the servers. "What have you done?" Zephan roared, his voice stripped of its smooth control raw with shock and rage. He sounded like a caged animal. From the darkness, Serena's voice emerged no longer thin or reedy, but clear and cold as glacial ice. I've bought us time, Zephan. You made 2 critical mistakes tonight. The first was underestimating me. She paused, letting the words sink in. The second was underestimating her. Then from another corner of the pitch-black room, Irene's voice spoke. It was devoid of its earlier terror, imbued with a steely, triumphant calm. While you were standing in the hall, Zephyr, enjoying your little power trip, I was on my phone. My personal cell. It has its own data connection, completely separate from your house network. I took a photo of every page of that dossier you built on me. And then I emailed everything. A profound, deathly silence filled the room. Zephyr didn't even breathe. I sent copies of the Ethelred flowchart, the offshore account numbers, the fabricated evidence against me, and your charming little press release about Serena's suicide to 2 people. Irene continued her words, cutting through the blackness like shards of glass. The first was Daniel Calloway at the Justice Department's white-collar crime division. My uncle plays golf with him. The second was the lead investigative reporter at the Wall Street Journal. The subject line for both emails was the Zephyr Moreau confession. They both have auto-confirmation receipts. It's done. You're bluffing, Zephyr snarled, but the words were hollow, devoid of conviction. He was reeling. And the lockdown, Zephyr? Serena's voice sliced in again, the final killing blow. That wasn't just a party trick. That was your in case of armed intruders protocol. Remember activating. It doesn't just seal the house. It sends an automatic Level 1 hostage situation alert directly to the Aspen Police Department and your private security firm. They are legally and contractually obligated to respond with full, immediate force. She let that hang in the air for a moment, and then they all heard it. Faintly at first, a distant, mournful cry, then growing louder, clearer, winding its way up the mountain road. Sirens. The sound of his defeat, the sound of their liberation. Zephyr let out a guttural scream of pure rage and slammed his fist against something metal, the sound echoing painfully in the confined space. The God King of the Aegis was powerless. The master manipulator had been outmaneuvered. The hunter was trapped in his own cage. "I'll ruin you," he bellowed into the darkness, his voice cracking with desperation. "I'll tell them you attacked me. I'll buy every lawyer in the country. You'll never see a dime. You'll do nothing," Serena said, her voice now quiet, almost a whisper, but carrying the immense weight of finality. "Because it's over. You stand in the dark, surrounded by all your expensive things, and you have nothing. No power, no escape, no one to believe your lies anymore." She reached out in the darkness, and her hand found Irene's. They stood together, 2 strangers bound by a shared enemy, listening to the approaching sirens. Serena spoke one last time, her voice a pronouncement of judgment in the dark tomb he had built for himself. "You thought this house was your fortress, Zephyr, but you just locked yourself in." In the end, Zephyr Moreau's empire didn't fall because of a market crash or a competitor. It fell because of 2 women he fatally underestimated, stripped of his assets to pay fines and restitution. His name, forever disgraced Zephyr, was sentenced to 30 years in federal prison. His lawyer, Marcus Thorne, was disbarred and charged as a co-conspirator. Irene Rossi, granted full immunity for her testimony, became the prosecution's star witness. She went on to create a foundation that helps victims of financial and emotional abuse, turning her trauma into a shield for others. And Serena. She never spoke to Zephyr again. She shed the Moreau name like a heavy coat, reclaimed her own identity, and found that her strength had been there all along, buried under years of manipulation. She learned that sometimes the most unlikely alliances are forged in the hottest fires. Her story and Irene's is a chilling reminder that the most dangerous prisons aren't made of steel and glass, but of secrets and lies. And that courage is the one key that can unlock them all. What did you think of Serena's incredible story of survival? Could you have been as brave in her position? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, please hit the like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more true-life dramas you won't forget. Thank you for listening.